The rain over Chicago that morning was the soft gray kind that made the glass walls of Hartwell Systems look almost soundless. On the 38th floor, the executive boardroom had been ready for nearly an hour, but no one inside felt anything close to ready. 12 people sat around a long table of polished walnut, members of the board, 2 senior engineers, the chief operating officer, an investor representative from a federal hospital fund, and the company's young chief executive, Astrid Hartwell. The screen at the head of the room glowed red. The deal under discussion was worth $90 million. If signed, it would lock Hartwell Systems in as the lead provider of emergency safety transfer systems for a chain of federal hospitals across the Midwest. If it failed, the company's stock would slide, layoffs would follow, and Astrid's seat as chief executive would not survive the next quarterly review. She had inherited that seat 8 months earlier, the day after her father's funeral, and the board had not stopped studying her since. The trouble on the screen was not theoretical. The latest simulation showed that, in certain blackout scenarios, the system's switch from grid power to backup exceeded the safe delay threshold. To anyone outside the hospital industry, a few extra seconds sounded harmless. To anyone who had ever watched a ventilator stutter, it sounded like a death sentence. The lead investor, a silver-haired man in a charcoal suit, kept his hand flat on a leather portfolio. He had not spoken in 10 minutes. Astrid stood at the head of the table in a cream bodycon dress with a soft V neckline, nude heels, her chestnut hair falling loose down her back. She looked the part of a chief executive who controlled the room. Inside, she could feel the tendons in her shoulders pulling tight. Contract was supposed to be the proof that she could carry her father's company forward. Instead, it was beginning to look like the thing that would break her. Corbin Shaw, the chief operating officer, leaned toward her from his seat at her right. He was 58, broad-shouldered, comfortable in a dark wool suit that probably cost more than most of the people in the building made in a month. He was the kind of man who had spent 30 years learning how to make difficult things sound routine. He told her quietly that the warning was nothing more than a quirk of the modeling software, that the design itself was sound, that delay would only let a competitor swoop in. He kept saying the word stable, like a charm. The lead investor finally spoke. His voice was even, almost gentle. He said that if the system could fail inside a hospital, his fund would not sign. He said it once, and then he closed the portfolio. Astrid turned to Henry Doyle, the head of the engineering team, and asked him to explain. Henry was 41 and wore his confidence like a second tie. He blamed the sensor data, the simulation version, an unsynchronized model. The more he spoke, the less the room believed him. No one asked the right question, because no one in that room knew yet that the answer was not standing inside the boardroom at all. It was outside, in the hallway, holding the handle of a wet mop. Oliver Grant had been pushing his cleaning cart down the polished stone hallway since just after 7 that morning. He was 29, tall, broad in the shoulders, with dark brown hair cut short and grayish-blue eyes that had the steady tiredness of a man who had survived more than most people guessed. His janitorial uniform was clean but worn, the gray fabric thin at the elbows from too many wash cycles. His work boots had been polished, but the soles were beginning to give. If a stranger had passed him on the street, that stranger might have guessed he was a former soldier, a foreman from a construction site, or a quiet engineer on his way home. Inside the tower, almost no one looked at him for longer than 3 seconds. People walked past him without nodding. A young analyst handed him an empty coffee cup as if he were a moving trash can. Another stepped around the cart so her heels would not touch the wet floor. Oliver did not react. He had grown used to the feeling of being treated as a fixture, something necessary but invisible. That morning, he had not been able to leave Bonnie at home. His daughter was 6 years old, with light brown hair that always seemed a little tangled, with serious eyes that took in more than a child should, and a soft cotton rabbit clutched under one arm. The rabbit had been her mother's, and one of its ears had been carefully sewn back on with white thread. Bonnie's preschool had closed because of a burst pipe, and their neighbor was sick. The building manager had agreed, reluctantly, that the child could sit on the bench at the end of the hall while he finished his shift, as long as she stayed quiet and out of the way. Bonnie did everything she could to be invisible. She sat in her blue jacket and small shoes, coloring in a notebook, careful not to knock the crayons off the bench. From time to time she lifted her eyes and smiled at her father. To Bonnie, Oliver was not a janitor. He was the man who could fix a bicycle chain in the rain, who read her the same picture book every night without ever sounding bored, who had cooked her instant noodles at 3 in the morning when her fever was the worst, and who had told her that no honest work was ever shameful. At the bench, Bonnie tugged at his sleeve and asked, in a small and very solemn voice, whether someday he would work in an office like the people behind those big doors. Oliver crouched down so his eyes were level with hers. He told her he just needed to do honest work, and that was enough. He kissed the top of her head. He went back to his cart. What no one in the building yet understood was that, before Oliver Grant ever held a mop, he had been paid to find the kinds of mistakes the engineers upstairs were now refusing to find. Inside the boardroom, Astrid was running on caffeine and pride. She was 27 years old. Her father, Charles Hartwell, had built the company in a garage in the early 1990s, scaling it from a small electrical safety contractor into a national supplier of emergency transfer systems. He had died of a stroke at his own desk 8 months earlier. Astrid had taken the call in a parking garage. She had not cried until the elevator doors closed. In the eyes of the trade press, she was the perfect headline. Young, beautiful, the heiress turned chief executive. Inside the company, several board members still treated her like a placeholder. When she was gentle, they called her soft. When she was firm, they called her arrogant. She had learned very quickly to keep her face still, to speak less, to decide faster. The Midwest hospital deal was supposed to end the doubt. $90 million was not just revenue. It was the headline she needed. It was the reason the board would stop counting the months until they could replace her. Corbin understood that better than anyone. He had been at her father's side for almost 20 years, and he believed, deep in the part of himself that called itself realism, that the company belonged to him in spirit, and that Astrid was a bridge to be crossed. So he leaned over and whispered, in his most measured voice, that a real chief executive would not let a flagged simulation kill the biggest deal of the year. He knew exactly which fear to press. The fear of looking weak. Astrid's assistant slipped through the door and bent close to her ear. The janitor was outside. There was a child with him. The schools had closed somewhere on the south side. The building manager wanted to know whether to send them down to the lobby. Astrid frowned. On any other morning, she would not have cared. On this morning, the very idea of unprofessional movement near the boardroom felt like a knife at her credibility. She told the assistant, briefly, to make sure no one disturbed the meeting. She did not see Oliver. She had not seen him at all. She had only set a small automatic line in her mind around the room and ruled that anyone in a gray uniform was on the other side of it. It was the same kind of line the board had drawn around her when they had decided she was too young to lead. She did not see the parallel. Henry Doyle had begun his explanation again, slower this time, the way a man does when he does not want to admit he is improvising. The Hartwell system was designed, he said, to switch from grid power to backup within a fixed window during any sudden outage. In normal commercial buildings, the design met every standard. In hospitals, the standards were tighter. In the latest tests, the model had begun reporting transfer delays that exceeded the safety threshold for sensitive medical equipment. Henry insisted that the fault was in the simulation, not the design. He suggested the sensor data fed in from the partner hospital was incompatible with the latest software build. Another engineer offered, hesitantly, that it might be a mismatched version of the modeling tool. A third said the alert threshold could simply be adjusted upward. None of these answers was wrong on its face. None of them was an answer. The lead investor asked the most basic question in the room. If a hospital lost power tomorrow, Would this system protect the patients on life support? No one answered him directly. Astrid asked Henry for a yes or no. Henry's mouth opened and closed. Corbin took the silence as his cue. He suggested that the contract be signed today with a side agreement for follow-up verification within 30 days. He framed it as a commercial reality, a way to protect the relationship. Astrid felt the shape of the trap. If she signed, and the system failed, her name would be on the document. If she refused, Corbin and his allies would say she had buckled. She did the only thing she could think of. She asked Henry to rerun the simulation in front of everyone with the current parameters. The progress bar crawled. The room held its breath. The result came back red. A board member to her left murmured, just loud enough to be heard, that her father would never have let a meeting collapse like this. The words landed exactly where he meant them to. Astrid pressed her thumbs into the edge of the table and did not move. In the hallway outside, Oliver had paused near the boardroom door, rolling his cart away from the threshold so he would not be in anyone's way. He could not see the screen, but he could hear voices. He caught the phrases transfer delay and backup load and hospital safety threshold. The words landed on him the way a familiar song lands on a stranger in a crowded room. He did not move yet. He told himself it was none of his business. His shift was almost over. But across the hallway, Bonnie was watching him with the careful eyes she used when she sensed he was thinking about something heavy. A young assistant arrived with a tray of coffee. The room was tense, and her hands were not steady. Just inside the boardroom door, the edge of the tray clipped the frame, and a porcelain cup tipped over. Coffee spread in a dark pool across the polished stone floor, right in the path the lead investor would take when he stood up to leave. The building manager, watching from the hallway, called Oliver in. There was no choice. The investor was already glancing at his watch. Oliver stepped into the boardroom quietly. He kept his eyes on the floor. He set his bucket down. He did not look at the people in the room. He folded his cleaning cloth in two and began to wipe up the coffee with calm, practiced strokes. Bonnie watched from outside the glass wall, holding the rabbit tight. She had seen her father clean floors before. She had not seen him do it under so many cold eyes at once. Henry was already losing his patience with the room. When he saw Oliver glance, almost involuntarily, at the screen, something inside him broke loose. He told Oliver not to stand there staring at the data. He told him he would not understand any of it. His voice was not even loud. It did not have to be. Every word was sharp. Oliver did not look up. He apologized softly and said he would be done in a moment. Corbin leaned forward and spoke just over the rim of his coffee cup. He said this was not a daycare. He said the executive boardroom was not the place for the cleaning staff to bring a child along. He said it with the same dry lightness he might have used at a charity dinner. Several heads turned, briefly, toward Bonnie. No one laughed. Their silence was worse than laughter would have been. They all heard him. None of them spoke up. Astrid felt the room tilt toward humiliation, and she chose, in that instant, the quickest way to reset the meeting. She turned to Oliver. She told him to finish quickly and step outside. She said they were in the middle of something important. Bonnie heard every word. Her small fingers tightened on the rabbit. Her eyes filled, but she did not cry. She had been taught not to embarrass her father in front of strangers. Oliver felt the pressure in his chest shift. He could see his daughter through the glass. He knew she was about to break. He kept wiping faster now because he wanted to be out of the room before she did. He wanted her to remember a father who had stayed steady, not one who had argued with people in suits and lost his job in front of her. He stood up to push the cart toward the door. At that exact moment, the model on the screen refreshed. A line of text appeared in the upper corner. Emergency transfer delay tolerance, 30 seconds. It was a small note in a much larger display. To Henry, it was a parameter setting. To everyone else, it was a number among hundreds. Oliver stopped walking. He did not say anything. His hand stayed on the handle of the cart. His eyes locked on the screen. In the hallway, Bonnie saw her father go still. She did not understand why. But she had learned over 6 years that when her father became this quiet, something true was happening inside him. For most people in the room, 30 seconds was just an engineering tolerance. For Oliver, it was an alarm bell. Years earlier, in another life, Oliver had worked as a risk certification analyst for an industrial safety firm that specialized in medical facility transfer systems. His job had not been to design new equipment. His job had been to find the things that could kill someone if they were missed. He had been good at it. He had seen patterns where other engineers saw clean spreadsheets. He had been very good at his job until he had been too good at it. When he discovered that his employer had begun loosening certification thresholds to push borderline equipment past inspection, he wrote a report. The company did not thank him. They edited his record, isolated him, and told the rest of the industry he was difficult. Then his wife was diagnosed with cancer, and he stopped fighting. He sold what he could and held her hand for 3 months. Bonnie was 3 years old when her mother died. Oliver took the first job he could find that paid in cash and started carrying a mop. That history sat inside him all the time, in a quiet room he did not visit. The number on the screen had just opened the door. He understood instantly what the parameter meant. A 30-second tolerance might be reasonable for a commercial office building, where a brief flicker only meant a few rebooted laptops. Inside a hospital, on a respirator or a heart-lung machine, 30 seconds was an eternity. If the model was using 30 seconds as its threshold, it was not measuring whether the system was safe. It was measuring whether the system looked safe. The two were not the same thing. He had a choice. He could push the cart out the door, keep the job, get Bonnie home, make her macaroni for dinner, and pretend he had not seen anything. Or he could speak in a room that had just told him, in 3 different ways, that his voice did not belong there. He looked at Bonnie through the glass. Her eyes were red but dry. She was watching him with the same steady look she had given him every morning since her mother died. She did not need him to be a hero. She only needed him to be the man he had told her he was. Oliver turned around. His voice was low, but not soft. He said he was sorry. He said the tolerance setting on the screen might be wrong. The room went still for one full breath. Then Henry laughed, short and dry. Corbin's eyebrows rose. Astrid's lips parted in disbelief. A board member, a thin woman with silver earrings, asked who he was. Corbin answered for him without turning his head. The janitor. The word fell into the room like a label being pressed onto a box. It was not a name. It was not a person. It was a function. Oliver did not raise his voice. He said he believed a 30-second tolerance was not appropriate for hospital systems. Henry pushed his chair back. He told Oliver with a small dry laugh that the document on the screen was a certified engineering model, not a cleaning manual. In the hallway, Bonnie heard the sneer. She put her face into the rabbit's fur and began to cry, very quietly, the way children cry when they have learned that their tears can make adults more cruel. Astrid held up a hand. She used Oliver's last name. She knew it only because the building manager had once forwarded her a hiring memo she had barely read. She told him the meeting was not the place for unqualified speculation. She asked him to step outside. Oliver did not move toward the door. He kept his voice level. He said that if Hartwell Systems was certifying a hospital backup system, the simulation needed to be rerun with a 3-second tolerance, not 30. Henry made a sound that was not quite a laugh. He told Oliver with the patient cruelty of an expert speaking to a child that there was a difference between a simulation tolerance and an operational tolerance. Another engineer joined in defending Henry. Neither of them addressed the substance of what Oliver had said. They argued with the uniform he was wearing. They simply assumed on the basis of the gray fabric that he could not know. Corbin saw the opening and took it. He told Astrid that this was exactly the kind of disorder a real chief executive would shut down before the investor took it the wrong way. He picked up the conference phone and asked the front desk to send building security to the 38th floor. The phrasing was practiced. It made the action sound procedural rather than personal. It was an order to remove a man. Astrid hesitated for a half-second. She had time to see in that pause that Oliver was not behaving like someone who had wandered into the wrong room. He was not shouting. He was not asking for money. He was standing very still and using the language of the field. But she was 27. The board was watching, and Corbin had spoken first. So she chose the safe option for her career. She told Mr. Grant that she respected every position in the building, but he was crossing a line. It came out more polite than Corbin's words. It still carried the same meaning. He did not have the right to speak. Oliver looked at her. He said that if he was wrong, he would leave the floor and never bring it up again. If he was right, the contract should not be signed in its current state. The lead investor's chin lifted. He asked Oliver if he had worked in this field before. Before Oliver could answer, Corbin cut in. He called it a stalling tactic. He said the room had heard enough. That was the moment Astrid first felt the edge of doubt. Why was Corbin so eager to stop the test? If Oliver was wrong, a single rerun would prove it. The only person in the room who should fear a rerun was someone who already knew the original numbers had been softened. Bonnie slipped through the boardroom door before anyone could stop her. She wrapped her arms around her father's leg. Her voice was small and wet. She asked her daddy if they could go home. Oliver crouched down. He brushed her hair away from her wet cheek. He thought for a single second of doing exactly what she asked, of carrying her to the elevator, and never looking back at any of them. Then he thought of children he had never met, lying in hospital beds connected to machines that needed steady power. He kissed the top of her head. He told her that Daddy needed to tell the truth one more time, and then they would go. Security came through the door at the end of the hall. They did not run. They did not need to. Oliver did not run either. He simply walked across the boardroom, past the polished walnut, past the rows of stunned faces, to the side console where the engineering technician had set down a stylus a few minutes before. He did not yank. He did not break anything. He picked up the stylus. He opened the parameter field. He changed the number 30 to the number 3. That was all. The room exploded. Henry lunged at him and snatched the stylus out of his hand, shouting that Oliver had just tampered with a certification model in front of an investor. Corbin shot to his feet, calling it data sabotage. A board member demanded that security restrain him. Bonnie cried out for her father. The two security officers stopped just inside the door, uncertain whether to grab the man with the mop or stand down. Astrid felt the blood leave her face. A janitor had touched the certification model in the middle of the company's most important meeting of the year. If the data was corrupt, the deal was dead. If the board wanted to remove her, this was the gift they had been waiting for. But Oliver did not fight. He set the stylus down on the table. He took 2 slow steps backward, raised both hands so the security officers could see them, and said the only thing he had come to say. He told them to just run it again. Henry called him insane. Corbin said there was no need to run anything. The board member with the silver earrings began to ask whether the integrity of the test had already been compromised. The lead investor lifted one hand. He did not raise his voice. He was used to rooms quieting for him. He told them to run it again. The room went silent. Astrid looked at the investor. She looked at Oliver. She looked at Bonnie, who had buried her face against her father's leg. She gave Henry the smallest possible nod. Henry sat down at the workstation, his jaw tight. He cleared the previous run. He set the parameter to 3 seconds. He started the simulation. The progress bar began to crawl across the screen. The room's silence had texture. Rain ticked against the glass. Bonnie's breath came in soft hitches against her father's leg. The lead investor watched the screen without blinking. Corbin's hand had closed around the arm of his chair so tightly the knuckles had gone white. Henry was sweating. Astrid stood very still, her arms crossed in front of her chest as if she were holding herself in. The progress bar reached 100%. The screen refreshed. The red did not vanish. It deepened. A new banner appeared at the top of the simulation, sharper and more specific than anything Henry had managed to produce in 2 hours. It pointed to a single failure point in the secondary transfer circuit. It listed the affected hospital areas: intensive care, surgery, neonatal, ... Oliver had not changed the model in his favor. He had changed it so the model could finally tell the truth. For a long moment, no one moved. The lead investor was the first to speak. He turned, very slowly, to Henry. He asked him whether what the janitor had said was correct. Henry's mouth had gone dry. He fumbled with the original specification document and found the line that defined the actual hospital tolerance. It was tighter, by an order of magnitude, than the model had been calibrated to. He had certified the previous test against the wrong number. He had not even noticed the substitution. A junior engineer, sensing that the room had shifted, opened the parameter change log. There it was, plain and time-stamped. The 30-second tolerance had been entered 3 weeks earlier, 2 days after a closed-door meeting between Corbin Shaw and the engineering team. Astrid asked, in a level voice, to see the email associated with that change. The legal counsel, a small man who had been hoping to spend the morning unnoticed, hesitated, then opened the system. The email loaded on the boardroom screen. It was written in Corbin's familiar, careful style. It asked the engineering team to widen the simulation tolerance to reduce noise that might create misleading alarms during the signing meeting. The phrasing was clean. The intention behind it was not. Everyone in the room understood what they were reading. Corbin tried for a moment to make it sound routine. He said the change had been a temporary adjustment. He said it was a matter of presentation, not safety. The lead investor did not look at him. He looked at Astrid. He told her with a small nod toward Oliver that this man was the first person in the room who had given him a clear answer all morning. Oliver did not enjoy the moment. He was not the kind of man who enjoyed those moments. He stood beside his daughter and watched the room rearrange itself around the truth. Bonnie was holding his hand. Her thumb rubbed the rough skin at the base of his palm. He felt the small, steady weight of her trust against his side. Henry lowered himself back into his chair as if his legs had stopped working. He stared at the screen. The parameter that he had defended for 2 hours had just become evidence against him. Astrid felt something in her chest unfreeze. If Oliver had not spoken, if he had wiped up the coffee and left the boardroom, she would have signed the contract. She would have put her name on a document that promised a hospital chain a system that could fail in surgery. She would have done it because the people she trusted had told her the warning was a glitch, and because she was so afraid of looking weak that she had stopped being able to listen. She looked at Oliver, properly for the first time. She did not see a uniform. She saw a tired, careful man who had, in the last 15 minutes, taken a great risk for people he would never meet. Corbin opened his mouth to defend himself. The lead investor lifted a finger. It was a small gesture. It was enough. Astrid asked the room to sit down. She turned to Oliver. The first question she asked him, in a voice that had let go of its hardness, was the only question that mattered. She asked him how he knew. Oliver glanced at Bonnie. She was still holding his hand. He took a slow breath. He told them briefly that he had once worked in the field. He had spent 4 years auditing emergency transfer systems for medical facilities. He had certified backup systems in 2 trauma centers and a children's hospital. He did not say the name of his old employer. He did not say what had ended his career. He only said that he had learned in that work that the most dangerous mistake in a safety system was rarely the thing that exploded. It was usually the thing that was set wrong, but looked normal. Oliver kept going calmly. He explained that the secondary transfer circuit on the screen could not, in its current design, meet the hospital's true threshold. Adjusting the simulation alone would not fix it. The fix needed to be in hardware. He suggested adding an independent transfer circuit dedicated to the most sensitive areas, isolated from the central switchboard, with its own monitoring loop. He recommended that the team rerun 3 specific scenarios. A total grid loss with delayed generator startup, a voltage swing during generator transition, a sensor lag in the intensive care wing. He offered the scenarios in a steady, almost gentle voice. They were specific enough that Henry could not pretend not to understand. Henry, to his small credit, did not argue. He started a new run with Oliver's first scenario. The screen began to chart a different curve. Within the first attempt, it became clear that an independent transfer circuit could bring the system into the actual standard. The lead investor folded his arms. He told Astrid, plainly, that he would not sign that day. But he said something else. If Hartwell Systems redesigned the system along the lines Oliver had described, and submitted a clean certification within 10 days, his fund was willing to keep the conversation alive. It was not a safe deal. It was a kept chance. It was in many ways better. Astrid understood what had just happened. Without Oliver, she would have signed the deal that morning. The next call she would have received would have been a hospital, 3 months later, telling her that a system she had certified had failed during a power event. Her career would have ended in a way no 27-year-old chief executive recovers from. Worse. Much worse. Bonnie took a step toward her father. She tugged gently at his sleeve. She asked, in the smallest possible voice, whether her daddy had fixed it. Oliver knelt. He pushed her hair away from her wet face. He smiled. Just barely. He told her he had only helped them look at one number again. Astrid heard him say it. She felt the line she had drawn that morning, between the kind of people who belonged in the room and the kind of people who did not, dissolve in her chest. She had been judging Oliver in exactly the same way the board had been judging her. She had not noticed until this minute how perfectly her own pride had fitted into theirs. Astrid did not wait for the room to recover. She informed Corbin Shaw, in front of the full board, that he was suspended pending an internal investigation into the parameter change and the email behind it. Corbin began to protest. He said he had only been protecting the company's interests. Astrid did not raise her voice. She told him that protecting the company did not mean hiding risk that could put patients in danger. Her father had never, in any version of the company she remembered, traded a patient's life for a closed deal. The name of his company would not be the name that began that practice now. Henry Doyle looked older than he had at the start of the morning. He apologized, slowly, and not only to Astrid. He turned in his chair and apologized to Oliver. He admitted that he had been so certain his model was correct, that he had stopped listening when someone had asked him a simple question. Astrid walked around the table to where Oliver was standing with Bonnie. She did not apologize quietly, or after the meeting, or in a hallway. She apologized in the same room where she had ordered him out. She named what she had done. She said she had judged him by his uniform. She said she had let her own fear of looking weak make her cruel. She said she had allowed his daughter to watch all of it. She said it without flinching. Oliver listened. He did not soften right away. He had not come into the boardroom to be praised. He looked down at Bonnie. She was watching Astrid carefully, the way children watch adults they are deciding whether to trust. He understood that this moment was not really about him. It was about what his daughter would learn to expect from the world. He nodded. He thanked her, quietly. That was all. Astrid offered him a position as an independent safety auditor for the redesign. She said the company needed someone who could find errors and, more importantly, someone with the courage to name them when no one wanted to hear it. Oliver thought for a long moment. He said he would consider it on one condition. Every certification report had to be filed honestly. No one in the engineering team would ever again be pressured to soften a number. Astrid agreed without hesitation. Bonnie looked up at Astrid with very serious eyes. She asked softly whether her daddy was getting fired. Astrid knelt down so her face was at the height of Bonnie's. She told her, "No, sweetheart, today her dad had helped a lot of people. The end of the morning was not a fairy tale. Oliver did not become rich in an hour. The company did not throw him a parade. He pushed his cleaning cart out of the boardroom, with Bonnie holding on to his free hand. The engineers stepped back to let him pass. No one made a joke. No one looked through him. The lead investor caught his eye and nodded once. In the service elevator, Bonnie leaned her head against her father's arm. She thought for a long time. Then she asked, very softly, whether her mom knew how good her daddy was. Oliver was quiet. He looked at the closing doors. He smiled, very faintly. He told her that her mom always knew. Behind them, in the boardroom on the 38th floor, the screen still glowed. The number 3 sat where the number 30 had been. It was a small change. It had quietly rearranged the morning, the contract, the company's future, and the way one room of powerful people would think, for a long time afterward, about the man who had walked in carrying a mop.